Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for listening to another episode of Talk Architecture podcast. And I have something special for you today, a guest of honor. So I'm honored to have you here today, Architect Lillian Tay of Veritas Architect. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Naziaty.
Yes, Architect Lillian is a director of Veritas Architect, and if you were to click on the website, I saw lots of projects there, and congratulate for for being one of the big companies for taking care and being the director of a big companies in Malaysian architecture, and you were also the PAM President in 2019, as we know it. PAM is the Malaysian Architecture Association, and is the Malaysian acronym is Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia. And of course, I know you since those days in the 90s, late 90s, when University Malaya School of Architecture started out, and you came to many of our crits since then and recently. And well, it's good to talk to you again. I mean, I'm excited to have this session with you, the first session on architecture education. Shall we start? Okay. This is what I like, when we talk about architecture education to someone who's really could give a very strong view of how it should be done, or I mean, what is the situation with architecture education in Malaysia. I'm going to propose this scenario, and I hope that you can comment on this. Schools of architecture in Malaysia need to be focused on the education of the architect as a whole human being, rather than just catering to the expectations of the industry in general, which is developer-driven. The fifth-year design thesis, for example, needs to be a start of a lifelong learning journey to discover where the best methodology is to engage with a design professional. During this design thesis, you should have a design professional rather than a full-time academic as a collaborator, because you're going to go into the industry after graduation the next year. The full-time academic can assist with the expectations of doing architecture in the school. And the design thesis doesn't have to be so building focused, but could be urban design or master planning. So the process could be more rigorous. You really look at, you're asking big questions and dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and learning, and not regurgitating the same thing. So, Lillian, please comment on how you would see the best approach to the design thesis and how architecture education need to be in a Malaysian school. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Naziaty. This is a topic close to my heart indeed. I first know Naziaty, I guess, some 20 years ago when I first started participating in crits at the University of Malaya, way back 20 years ago. And I still do till today, I'm proud to say, and I actually look forward to it a lot. So I'm quite familiar with the students, for instance, in the thesis year, which is the one I do most. And but first, of course, I would say that architecture by its nature encompasses many fields. So correctly, as you said, architecture is not just architecture education shouldn't just be about imparting all the technical know-how that you'll need when you're practicing, but it is a wide, broad-based education. Mostly programs are quite broad-based. You have the technical fields, like a bit of structures, and you also have history to learn about the culture of the society, the community that one would be working with, and with it as well, all its cultural legacies. besides all the technicalities of planning places, planning buildings, both what it needs to do as space to accommodate people, as well as the technicalities like the safety regulations that need to be complied, fire safety and things like that. So it is very wide. In fact, I think probably comparable to medicine in terms of its length of course and the intensity and breadth of the topics covered. And that itself, I think, it's a good education for anyone. In fact, I often tell young people whose parents come up to me and say, "Oh, please tell them, advise them what they should do." And I said, if you're not really sure, you go and study architecture. It doesn't just prepare you for architecture. If you go to school and go to an architecture program, you come out of it and you are probably able to handle a lot of different types of jobs. Could be in communication, could be, not just in architecture, but perhaps in development. Could be, you could go into writing, go into teaching. It's because it's so diverse, it also prepares you for to doing a lot of things in life. I know architects who have given up architecture and they design books, and there are many architects who have become chefs, and open up restaurants. I think it's a training in the creative process. If I had to just simplify it. So whether you finally use that creative training to build buildings or to be a social critic or to be a journalist or a chef or a bookmaker, it equips you pretty well, that I would say. And I myself was fortunate to have gone to a university, not in Malaysia, because at that time when I was at that age, there weren't actually that many schools of architecture in Malaysia. Being very science-driven and technology-driven at that time, lots of opportunities to do engineering, for instance, but there was only one architecture school then. Back in the early 80s, which was the University Technology Malaysia, and even so, you see, it started its roots were in University Technology.
I was there, I did my diploma at UTM.
Yeah, it was the first full-fledged architecture program.
And when I went to the UK, I didn't have any problem with technical understanding. I just wanted to learn theory more than anything else, because that was what was lacking in UTM or Malaysian schools in general, the theoretical part.
Yeah, so, I think because it came from a technology base, and then later on the second school was a University of Science Malaysia. So it also came from building science and surveying. So and it was actually, to its credit, University of Malaya, I think, when it formed its architecture program a bit later, in the early or mid-90s, that it was able to start, tabula rasa and come up with a program that would encompass, that's not from a technical background and that sought to be wider. And I do believe that is something that sets UM apart. Perhaps less so now. I think by now the years, it's all flattened out a bit, but that was the start. But for me, going through a liberal arts education in the US, I was at Princeton for 7 years, doing both my bachelor's and master's. But having said that, I also started my undergraduate degree in the joint architecture and engineering program. Coming from the developing world, there was always a big emphasis on technology and sciences and engineering in Malaysia. So I also had that bit of mindset, but it didn't do me too much harm. I think it's always good grounding to understand a bit more about structure. But liberal being arts, in that whole environment.
When you think about liberal arts, what is it? In Malaysian architecture school, they are not based on liberal arts. So
it's very structured because we have inherited the sort of British professional curriculum where there is there is the usual required components of a bit of structures and mechanics, and building systems, and then the rest, a lot of it is on practice, preparing people for practice. it's very practice oriented. I believe the programs in Malaysia still taking its roots from the first programs in Malaysia and taking its example from
more vocational training, sort of British approach of architecture education, less liberal arts. Do you think that there should be a liberal arts based architecture school in Malaysia?
Well, it doesn't need to be such, but a bit. I think architecture students should be given the opportunity to have a wider selection of electives, so that they could, study things which are not directly related to architecture. For instance, I had a chance to study like music and languages and literature, things like that. That a hardcore architecture program in Malaysia wouldn't really put any emphasis on. And I think the importance of all these other creative disciplines is that it helps you to understand the creative process, helps you to understand, life and what people love about life. And in the end, architecture is about making spaces for people to enjoy their lives, right? And to enable communities to thrive.
Do you think, Lillian, that liberal arts education, when you're given more electives and you're given much more freedom to choose how to shape our education ourselves, and to explore these different things, we're able to be more critical about, if we able to be more, because our mind is open, because we've been reading a lot of other people's minds through reading different things and exploring different disciplines. That will be, being open-minded or listening to other views make us much more critical. To me, that's do you agree with that? That's what's lacking in our schools of architecture.
Yeah, exactly. I think it sharpens, that your sort of spirit of inquiry, basically, which is what the thesis do. I think you wanted to
going back to the thesis.
Yeah, it's about how you, how you understand things and how you expand on whatever concept that you're working on into application. There's a whole, because usually education tends to be either application oriented or it's too academic. I think one of the things about architecture is that it could benefit from both, to have that type of research and inquiry, this spirit of inquiry that you really go into a topic and understand what is the fundamentals of whichever discipline or topic that you're doing. And then after that, to distill from it the essential learning or essential principles and philosophy, and see how you want to then give physical expression to it, which may be relevant to a particular building or the people for whom you are doing the building for. So I think having this wider knowledge of how other fields operate helps to enrich the whole creative process in which you make buildings.
Okay,
it's not just a roof and a wall and windows, but
does it happen in any students work that you have met, or any students of from University Malaya, for example, that you've come to, any projects that sort of made you think, because you come, maybe you don't expect much from the students, or you expect certain things to happen, to be discussed, or were there examples that surprise you in a good way in schools of architecture in Malaysia? Were there any students' work that you remember, or the way they are in terms of their critical thinking, or?
Yeah, I think the first few years, probably they have more classroom learning, and that fifth year thesis is good because they suddenly have to create their own program and create their own, put up their own postulation on what they want to examine, what they want to, critique, or what they want to do that is innovative. So that is a good beginning. They want to do something different. And what I noticed too about many of the programs, they do immediately engage a larger social or community agenda, which is good. It's not. I mean, I think that's a good ethic. Perhaps I've never really even thought about it, but now that you ask, I think most of them come up with a topic that has some sort of a social agenda or aspiration. And that's very good, actually. It's not just, nobody is allowed to just build a house, for the thesis. They create either a new typology or envision a new transformation of an existing typology of, whether it's a library or a church or, a stadium, a hotel, whatever that they have taken upon. They also look at, I've seen many of the thesis students also want to change the standard, the standard typology, that they want to do a new building that they feel is needed for evolving trends and how people live in of course, in the Malaysian community. Mostly, most of the projects tend to be locally sited. So I think it's a good exploration. And I think it's also good it's not just the student learning from their own thesis, but they also learn from all their colleagues' different explorations, whether, because each of their 20, usually a class is around 20 plus, and they will learn about every of their colleagues' own process. And so I think that's, I mean, that's why I think it's actually good to have a thesis that the student proposes themselves. They choose the site themselves. It really helps to focus the inquiry and gives them a lot of scope to learn, not just from their own, but from all their colleagues' thesis. So I'm a big believer in that. It's not a new thing. My own program also had a thesis.
Yes. We always think about our design thesis that we went through when we were in school as well, and you had a good one, is that what you said. But you see, there is a criticism that the design thesis topic, when they proposed topics or sites, the lecturer or the academic would say that's not going to do. So I think you should be doing something else, whatever. And they would end up following what the lecturer would suggest, because they don't want to, they would think that is very sort of a risky thing for them to go against their lecturers. I have the understanding that if it was the supervisor of the design thesis is an architect or practicing architect who understand what design thesis is, and they're involved, they would do it in a different way. They wouldn't just literally suggest you do a different topic or a different site. You would choose someone, just say the student of architecture, choose someone whom they think would help them or would collaborate with them. Is that a viable thing, or is that something that is better than the current way that design thesis is practiced? You think?
Well, I do think that it would be a good thing because I think in your thesis studio, you basically have 20, 30 students, and you have around 3 or 4 instructors. So they, if I'm not mistaken, right, 3 or 4 thesis advisors. And if they had, if the nature of the thesis or the topic of the thesis was something that perhaps instructor may not have had that direct exposure to, both in whether on paper or for, and obviously my office has very thin windows. You can hear some. It's like, So I think then they can choose someone who had perhaps been working in that particular, who had experience doing that that particular type of jobs. For instance, somebody wants to do a transport hub or something like that, and they may want to have as their thesis advisor someone who has done a lot of work in transportation. That I think that would be a very beneficial guidance that they would get. I also think that often when the technical courses are taught, it tends to be very technical and theoretical, whereas actually as a practitioner, you will actually have a less rigid view of it. For instance, I actually, for instance, always find that there is no need to work out the car park, for instance, in the projects here. It's just that in reality, of course, most buildings in Kuala Lumpur, you end up having to accommodate a car park in the basement somewhere, and therefore but that shouldn't be used as a starting point when you're in the classroom. I feel that that's a constraint that you can deal with easily and resolve easily when in the real working world.
You know why that is a problem? Because many academics think that the complexity of a thesis is based on technical complexities or to do with the size of it. The complexity is the size. If it's there's more square meters, that means there's more complicated. So the student will have more challenges. But actually, they don't look at intersections of disciplines, to be the complexity, when dealing with typology and changing adaptive reuse or something like that, or the community architecture concerns that you mentioned earlier, to look into the social and cultural aspects of it, which could give the discipline. If you say architecture is a core thing, then when you put social, cultural, and even economic, then they have to deal with those things deeply. They have to read on those subjects. For example, if it's Orang Asli settlement, for example. So there's always a discomfort for, Lembaga Architect Malaysia would say you have to have a certain size of a building in their guidelines. So Orang Asli settlement will need to still be like some housing densities, those technical debates become the core of the debate of the design thesis, not about their culture and looking at the essence of what their culture is. Maybe they believe in the spirit, so something that is secondary. And it's not like in certain schools in the West, like AA, because I'm so used to the AAs, where the studio tutor is interested in some area and they have a lot of readings and already some research on that area and got the students to read and debate and actually make it as a reference to their design thesis. So that makes them more critical in the discussion or something like that. So that's the thing that I realized. I mean, I maybe you'd like to comment on what I said on that. What do you think that maybe it's?
Well, that's why I think that what you mentioned goes back to this need, I believe, for the architecture program to have a lot of electives in related social science and humanities, so that they already have they will learn about different aspects, not just look at architecture as a technical thing and then having to serve its purpose and then trying to figure out what's this vessel you need to serve its purpose, but to be exposed to the type of discourse, whether in music composition or anthropology, things like that. They are things that you can learn.
Because they didn't have liberal arts education in the beginning. So once they step into that year, the design thesis year, they are on their own to find the readings, to find, So if you already have a tutor that is, just say, from the social sciences and giving you a list of things that you need to read, or the architect, the supervisor of the unit of the design thesis or something says that you have to read this stuff and then you see this person who's in social science and come out with an essay before you start or something. I mean, depend on what they want to do, right? So that will give them a different experience rather than where the students don't know what to do really in the beginning when it comes.
Well, I think it's simpler and probably better if they just simply learn all of this together with the people who are, I mean, with the other students who are learning it. For instance, they should just take a course in, music, for instance, with the rest of the music students, and they have to learn it like the music students would. They have to learn history as the history students would, of visual arts as the visual arts student would. They shouldn't be having to have it already prepackaged. They need to immerse themselves. I think that's my view. That's why I feel that they should just select what is it that interests them. The process of creating, making music, and the impact of music and the history, whatever. There are a lot of different things. Other people are interested in history, social history, for instance. They are activists, they have an activist mind or something, and they are more interested in people's agenda, or some are more interested in cultural expression, and they may just study about the history and cultures of people, and about art, fine arts, and cultural traditions. I think it's wide, and one shouldn't structure it. We should just allow them to have a certain number of courses, for instance, that they have to take, so that they can pursue and understand the discourse, in other disciplines, not just in the architectural process and the professional, journey, and what we need to complete that education or training of an architect. We want to make it an education as opposed to a training of an architect.
Yeah.
So that's and that education cannot be limited to the training needed for the day-to-day work of an architect.
That is very important, actually, the points that you come across with, because it's very much in based on the benefits of liberal arts education. We need to change ourselves, our schools of architecture in Malaysia, to suit that. Because of, as you said, the electives like music or social history at the beginning, when they're in I think in America, you call it the freshman years, right? In the beginning, when they are exposed to that, whether they want to pick up, go deeper into it later when they are in the final year of the master's course. So that is by right. I think I remember that should be the case, really, when you're able to make your own choices. As a university student, it's not supposed to be a secondary school anymore,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
sorry,
that's something I would really advocate for all Malaysian universities, that they should widen the requirement for electives, and they should be given the full liberty. If they wanted to just go and take a course in philosophy, let them do it. And
there's no course in philosophy in Malaysia, by the way.
Oh, really?
No, that's the point. You see, when there is a course in philosophy in Malaysia, then you will start seeing the roots of liberal arts in Malaysia. There's no course in philosophy.
That's the problem. You see, we probably have already compartmentalized learning. And that's what's needed. Maybe overall in Malaysia, that there need to be a more generalist approach in the early years, the first couple of years, before we go into a very specialist approach towards university training. To basically, as mentioned earlier, to make it an education and not a training.
This is a good refresher for me, and I hope that the listeners out there get to some points here by Architect Lillian, which is taking it from your own experience and how you see architecture education, and this is crucial. It's a crucial point to think about where we're going to go from here in the light of the architect and the artificial intelligence coming in, as you know.
Oh, yeah, that's a
because But anyway, could you give a couple of minutes of something you'd like to say on architecture education before we stop this session?
Well, I've said I believe the things which matters most to me is to make sure that programs become more and more broad-based as opposed to more and more specialist. That I think that's a message that I would have for all the architecture schools in Malaysia. Because it's a wide field, and you will be able to learn how to design a car park in your first job very quickly. So you don't need to spend 3 weeks or at all. And the application of it versus learning it theoretically is a big difference. When you actually have to make it work simultaneously with what you're doing with the rest of the building and where the entrance is and all. That will make you learn really fast. So I wouldn't waste any time in the precious 5 years at school doing too many technical things, because you will already have to deal with it later. So do the things that you won't be able to do later, which is to really understand the process of inquiry in other fields, and learn from that. Whether it's, as mentioned, music, philosophy, psychology, and economics, even if you are interested to look at it from that point. So and this requires a rethinking, not at the students' level, but at the level of the faculty, to see whether is it wide enough, and to create that space, that freedom, to loosen the curriculum so that not everything is structured. And when you enroll in year one, your entire journey. You should have them choose what they want to learn a bit. At least some 10% of the courses or something are electives in any discipline that the university offers. And of course, you've raised the fact that some institutions may be quite specialized already. They shouldn't be like learning like building science if you're already in architecture, or learn surveying. No. Let the surveyors do their stuff and all that. Don't bother about those things. But learn the things that will feed your creativity.
Yeah, that's important, to feed your creativity. Okay, with that, thank you so much, Architect Lillian, for the first part of our chat with Architect Lillian Tay. Thank you so much, Lillian.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And I'll see you again shortly.
Yes, see you.